buddy gave to me. I saw his buddy, and I saw the Boston Terrier. So, I'm thinking of working there after my intern is working with the kids in the kids' field, so I'm thinking of working there. I'll be perfect for that job, stopping the bears, helping the kids make their furry friend. Now they have a new logo because it says where best friends are made. It says furry friends.
I mean, slogan?
Yeah, their slogan, yeah. It's where, yeah, it used to be where best friends are made, now it's like furry.
Great.
Yeah.
Hopefully that means it's soon.
Yeah. Plus they're very, 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 too much. Plus they're very expensive. So, I'm also
Eight by 20. That ain't a little bit.
they have new stuff.
Oh, and 9 was 80.
Agreed, yeah. Alright, we're super looking.
Great, I remember.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay. Two people be great, told them this spread is incredible. I'm not joking. No, it's just, there was like a really good work on them. I ordered it. That's very sweet. That's a high compliment from Sarah.
Sarah was overall. It was over. I also got the high compliment where she said we can come in. So people got some very but yeah, she said your teaching was really after.
And it was over the notion of like Sarah's having to be stuff was the first Exodus because it was the first like going from aerospace and bearing this to very cool stuff. Alright, send us 2 people if you can.
Yes.
Thanks. Shipping us some Jews. We're giving it another minute to see if other people come in, but there are some folks on the field though, so we will make Minnie and then we will read Torah. Just waiting for the.
Robert Chimney says, I'll be working at Build-A-Bear for my intern.
You are?
Yeah, I'm gonna go, I want to.
That's great.
So if you take your kids out to go small, I'll be really glad to step their first friend and give you guys a discount.
They've been bugging me because they heard Bluey is at Build-A-Bear now,
I
so
know,
I will see, maybe for Hanukkah this year.
They're $36
talk, Paige.
now.
I know, for Hanukkah, maybe.
Hanukkah, I would go
Yeah.
for, get them Bluey, like,
Yeah.
and you just.
They love it.
I don't get, just remember, don't get the sound of the set because they don't last long.
Yeah.
Get the outfit, it's gonna be, I'm telling you, they have really cute outfits
So
now.
great, I love that, thank you for telling me, and congratulations, so great.
Build-A-Bear was expensive when I was a kid, but $36 is.
Yeah, I know that, right? Cause my bear, my Poker Rings was $36, my little kitty character was $36. And I was like, where they used to be 10, 25, 30?
I went to Build-A-Bear 15 years ago, and I got.
And they were like $10, $15, right? Just $20.
20 was like the most expensive. 20 was like you got an outfit for the thing and like a.
Right.
Yeah, I
And
remember.
you went through the whole like naming thing.
Yeah.
And a
And
certificate and everything.
That
And
was
mine was
the-
like $20.
mine was, let's see, back then I got the High School Music Fair. That was like $25. So I was into this.
$20 and had a little, I got the little sound thingy.
Yeah, those don't last.
Squeezing the pod. They got the Lakers jersey for it, a Kobe Bryant Lakers jersey.
Oh, nice.
There's, there's sports stuff too. There's sports fairs too.
And mine was just a normal white, like poodle type.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I know which one. 'Cause I remember the names of the fairs. But the Hello Kitty ones are out there. Ooh, when I saw that price, I said $36. That was outrageous because I remember it's cheaper than that.
Yeah, I wonder if that line, when the lines are gonna be closed all the way because the sun's like off that building.
Yeah.
Well, the sun will go
Right. Yeah, but the weekday Slim Shalom has Shabbat Mincha towards the back on page 170. That's pretty handy.
Very good.
One more.
Well, where's AJ?
Right outside, just waiting outside.
Ah.
Yeah. But to have a count for a minion, we're gonna need AJ plus one more person.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So close.
So I would say get Bluey for the kids if they like Bluey, 'cause Bluey's popular too.
Yeah, they would love that if I'd say yes. Come on, send us your hand.
Pocket size Sim Shalom full on has the partial way in the back to the 900s.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's the only other super I know that does that.
I know, you know, there's some Orthodox sitters.
Yeah, I've seen that. I mean, I'm talking about conservative screen that I know of.
Yeah.
And I know the art
Alright.
school has one.
Our 10th is coming in just a moment.
That's fine. Well, it's close enough so they'll have like Rashi and all the other things.
Partial.
Shh.
Also for the festivals, the weekend.
Joey, will you be my Gabbai Sheni, please?
Okay.
Okay. AJ, will you do Hagbah on the Torah?
Sure.
Great, thanks. Oh, I should probably. Oh, this time I didn't triple check that the Torah. I should always check.
I was listening.
Okay.
Check which Torah is in here.
That's
Oh.
chill right
Perfect. All right. Definitely a minion. Right. We need a 10th in here if you're willing to help us Nate.
Sorry?
Wait, are you looking for?
Looks like you guys are set.
We don't. We actually do need one more person in here because to count for a minion, we need one more person. But there is somebody who's about to walk in, and as soon as they do,
Terrific.
we can like.
Well, hang on.
Yeah, thank you. You can swap out for that. That'd be perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it. Shabbat shalom. All right, Shabbat shalom, everyone. We begin on page 214 in the back, towards the back of the Sidor Lev Shalem. Middle. 214 with Ashrei. Ashrei Yoshvi Vitecha, Od Yalalu Chesel Hashem Shekachalo, Ashrei Yam Shadonai Eloah. Tzilat Adonai Taber Pi, Vivarech B'Sar Shem Koshol Yelamayit, Vanach Nevarech Yah, V'Yitzav Yad Olam Hallelujah, Uval Zion, Goel Shavi Fesh V'Yakov, New Adonai V'Nizim. V'Yitakadosh Shevti Lo Yisrael, V'Karazel Ze, V'Yamar, Kadosh 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 Adonai Zvaot, Melech Laris Kodo, V'Lido Yisrael. V'Tisayni Ruach V'Shmai Charai Korash Gadol, Baruch Adonai Mi Mikom, Delight Me God. Adonai Himloch Lilam Ba'id and Wakadol. ויבטחו בך יודעי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך, אדוני, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיר תורה וידיר, יגדע ויקדש שמי רבה, ויאמר דברי קירותי, וימליך מלכותי בחייכון, וביום איכון, וחיי לכל בית ישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב, ויאמרו אמן, יהי שמי רבה ברך, Le'olam olmei yiparach v'yishavach v'yipar v'yishma v'yitnasei v'yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shmei du kodesha v'richu le'elam min kol berchata v'shirata tush berchata v'nechmata Dami Ram Yama v'imru amen. We rise around 2:18. V'ani tefilati lecha Adonai hei ratzon l'imberoch chastecha v'ni b'emet yishecha v'yibin so'ar rom v'yomer Moshe K'von Nevi chutzoi v'achavin nus misanecha mipanecha Hini tzion tetzei Torah v'dvar na Yushalayim Baruch Shantan Torah L'mos Gadolu l'Adonai iti v'niromema shemo yachtav l'chad
אפשר לנשק את התורה שלנו באופן מאוד נדוש. בשביל זה אני באה.
Got it?
See, I'm gonna face this way, right?
Yes. All right, Joey, can I have your, thank you, your assist? I'll be on this side, and you can be on the other. In just a moment, we will read from Parshat Chayei Sarah. You can find it in the Eitz Chaim of Chumashim on some page that someone will tell me.
127 in the Eighth Chaim Chumash, and if you're using the back of the weekday Slim Shalom, it's page 268.
That's right. Got it, right?
Yeah, page 127. In the left, in the Eighth Chaim.
What did Nafil?
127 in the Eighth Chaim.
Got it?
Yeah, but Sheva.
Oh, okay.
Did I say it right?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
perfect.
good.
Great. Okay, would the bear with very cute ears, would the bear with very cute ears and her adult like to come and take an aliyah from the Torah? And she can come see up close? Great. And I'll call you up 1 second. ותגלה ותראה מלכות עולנו בזמן קרוב ויחום פליטתנו פליטתם ובית ישראל לכנו חסר רחמים ורצון ונאמר אמן הכל הבו גודל אלוהינו תנו כבוד לתורה יעמוד נוח בן ישראל לעלייה הראשונה ברוך שנתן תורה לעמו ישראל בקדושתו ואתם הדבקים אדוני לכם חיים כולכם היום. Actually, you're going to go to Barry's right where the blessings are. And he'll show you where to touch and kiss.
Yeah, use that. Perfect.
And if it's okay with you, I'll gift you this for the aliyah.
Touch it here.
Okay.
Face around. All right, Jerry, touch it here and kiss that. Okay, and there's the prayers there.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Baruch.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Ba'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Ba'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'na'ata manu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai noten haTorah.
Hold on. Amen. Vahi Chayei Sarah Mea Shana V'Esrim Shana V'Sheva Shanim Shnei Chayei Sarah V'Tomat Sarah Perkiyat Arba'i Hebron Be'eretz Canaan V'Yavacham Lispot L'Sarah Lichvotah V'yachan Avraham me'al p'nei meito, v'edaber al b'nei chet lemor, ger v'tashaf anochi imachem tenu li achuzad kaver imachem, v'yakabral meitim l'fanayim, v'yanu b'nei chet Avraham lemor lohom, shoma'eni Adoni, Shema'eni Adoni, Nesi Elohim Ata, B'techenu B'bichar, B'chavrenu, Kavor et Meitecham, Ish Mimenu et Kivrolo, Yikle, Mimcha, Mimchar Meitecham, V'yachan Avraham, B'shachu L'am Haaretz, Livnei Chet.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen.
Tamon.
Or Rachel Zachava,
Chava.
Zad Zachava, or Rachel Zachava,
Deborah.
Deborah Miriam, and I'll do my grandma, Gilto Catler. Gilto.
Lali Ashniya. Perfect. And you're going to borrow the talit over there?
Thank you.
Make that the communal talit. Second,
Or
Aliyah.
you can use this.
Okay.
Page 128, verse 8.
Baruch
Let me show here. Okay. Okay.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hambara. Baruch Adonai Hambara Lamvaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher baharbanu mikol halamim v'talanu lanu letorto. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. V'deber itam lemor, im yesh et nafshechem likbar et meitim ulfanaim, shema'eni shema'uni figoli, befron ben sachar, v'iten li et me'erad hamapela, asher lo asher b'kitzei sadechu, b'chesef malei itnenu li p'tech. Itnena lihi b'tachechem lachochat kaver v'efron Yoshe b'top b'nei ched v'yan Efron achiti et Abraham b'asnei b'nei ched l'chol b'ei she'ari ro lemor lo Adoni shma'eni hasadeh natati la kehemra asher bo l'cha natita Naticha le'edei b'nei ami Nataticha la chaver meitacham V'ishtachu Avraham lifnei am haaretz hamaretz.
Again, Paige, you're going to touch and kiss.
Okay. Baruch Hu et Adonai Hambara Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah demet v'chayei v'alanu notan b'heinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Okay, Yasher Koach, and the bear or other creature can sit down. Paige is going to hang around there and pass the talit over here to our third Ole Ya'amod. Tuvia Benyamin. Shimshon Tzvi Verut Laliash Lishit.
Page 129, verse 13.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Borach Olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Borach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. V'deber lefron basnei am haaretz lemor ach amata lo. Imata lo atalu shmaini natati kesef hasadeh kach mimeni v'echra et miti shamam v'yan Efron et Abraham limor lohom Adoni shmaini eretz arba meyon shekel kesef b'nei v'eincha mahi v'et miteh kavor v'yishma Abraham el Efron Yeshkel Abraham lifron et hakesef asher dibei baznei ched arba me'ot shekel kesef over ersel socher.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
So you can help, make sure that the tour is wrapped after AJ lifts, okay?
Okay.
Tamod Hagmagbiha Yamod Hagolel. Please rise for the lifting and wrapping of the Sefer Torah. Vizot HaTorah Asher Sam Moshe Lifnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Adonai v'yad Moshe. L'machazikim ba, tomechei ha'meushar. Yitzchayim hi l'machazikim ba, tomechei ha'meushar. Dirachecha darchi noam, v'chol netivotei shalom. Dirachecha darchi noam, v'chol netivotei shalom.
Ay, ay, ay.
As I prepare to take the Torah back from AJ, is there anybody who has an El Mali Rachamim this particular Shabbat this week to be recited? If not, then I'll continue and I'll invite you to remain standing. Thank you, AJ. I'll take the Torah in my arms here. We're on page 221. Yelelu et Shem Adonai ki niskav Shemo levado hodol eretz v'shamai v'eremiken lemo Tila l'chol chasidav livnei Yisrael lam karo hallelujah l'David mizmor l'Adonai haaretz u'la Mihu say melech hakavod Adonai tzvot hu melech hakavod Selah. Hilarious. I have more of the story to tell you. Hashivinu Adonai elecha v'nashufa chadish yameinu kegedem. Chatzi Kaddish is on page 222. Yikadav yikadash mirabah yamad yivra kurtev yimelech mukute b'cheichon v'yimechon u'chayidecho beit Yisrael bagalav yizman kariv v'imru amen yishamei rabah v'varach le'olam ulmei homaya yitvarach v'yishabach v'bar v'yishma v'nasei v'yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shemidu kudesha v'richu le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiram be'oma v'imru amen. The service continues with the whispered private Amidah beginning on page 223. It's traditionally recited while standing. If you've not yet completed your own private Amidah, please continue at your own pace. We're on page 223, where I'll begin the repetition of the Amidah. When we get to the blessing at the end of page 225, Ha'el HaKadosh, you're welcome to be seated. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Yisrael Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei HaKol V'Zocher Chasrei Havot U'Mivi Goel Livnei V'Nehem L'man Shemo B'Yahav V'Amelech Ozer Foked U'Moshiach U'Magem Baruch Ata Adonai, Magen Avraham Ufoked Zara, Ata Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechim Itim Ata Rav Le'Oshia, Mashiv HaRuach U'Marida Kashem, Mechal Kachayim B'Chesed Mechim Itim Berachamim Rabim, Samech Novelim V'Rofech Olim Matiras Urim, U'Mkayim Emunatol L'Shnei Afar Micham Ochabal Kivurot, U'Mita Melach Melech Mimit, U'Mchayei U'Matzmiach Yeshua, V'Neman Ata D'Chayot Mitim Baruch Ata Adonai, V'Chayei Amitim. נקדש את שמך בעולם כשם שמות ישמותו בשמי מרום כך כתוב ביד נביאך וקרא זה אל זה ואמר קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוך כל הארץ כבודו למען ברוך יאמרו ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקום עובדי קודשך כתוב לאמור Himloch Adonai Le'olam Elohek Sion Le'dor Vador Hallelujah Le'dor Vador Nagigod Lecha U'Netzach Netzachim Kedushatecha Naktish V'Shivchacha Eloheinu Mipinu Lo Yamush Le'olam Va'ed Ki Melech Tov V'Kadosh Ata Baruch Ata Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh Ata Echad V'Shimcha Echad U'Mikemcha Yisrael Goy Echad Ba'aretz Tiferet Gedula V'Ateret Yeshua Yom Nucha U'Tishalem Natat Avraham Yakel Yitzchak Yiranein Yaakov Manav Yenuchu Vo Menuchat Ahavan Nova Menuchat Emet V'Emunah Menuchat Shalom V'Shava V'Shket V'Vetach Menucha Shlema Shatarot Tzibach Yakiru Vanecha V'Yideu Ki Mitachayim Menuchatam V'Yom Menuchatam Yaktishu Et Shemecha Eloheinu V'Eloi Voteinu Ritzevim Menuchateinu Kadeshenu B'Mitzvotecha V'Teinu Chalkeinu B'Tortecha Sabinu B'Tovecha V'Samachinu B'Shuatecha V'Taher Libeinu Le'V'Decha V'Emet V'Anchilenu Adonai Eloheinu V'Yavav Ratzon Shabbat Kodshecha V'Yinuchuva Yisrael Mekadesh Shemecha Baruch Ata Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu B'Mecha Yisrael V'Yitilatam V'Shavat Havadah L'Bir B'Neitacha V'Tilatam Yavatik B'Ratzon V'Tehi L'Ratzon Tamid Avadat Yisrael Amecha V'Techezina V'Shuvcha L'Tzion Merachamim Baruch Ata Adonai Hamachazir Shechinato L'Tzion Modim Hatov kilo chalurecha mecha v'mrachem kilo tamil chasadecha b'olam kivinu lach v'el kulam yibarach v'yitramam shemcha malginu tamid le'olam v'ed v'chol achim du chaselta v'yalalu shemcha bemet ha'eli shotenu v'ezrotenu selta baruch Ata Adonai, Hatov Shimcha Uchanei Lechodot, Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amecha, V'yolchol Shvei Tevel Tzasim Le'olam Ki Atahu Melech Adon, Lechol HaShalom V'tov B'necha, Levarech Et Amecha Yisrael B'cholit, Uv'chol Shah B'shlamecha, Baruch Ata Adonai, Havarech Et Amo Yisrael B'Shalom. Let's read it wildly. Tzidkatcha tzedek le'olam, v'tortecha emet, v'tzidkatcha Elohim ad marom, asher asita gedolot, Elohim micha mocha tzidkatcha ke'ariel, mishpatecha tehom rabba, adamuv heimat Hoshia Adonai. Page 230. Ikadav ikadash mirabah Bilma divra kirtevim nechmach utebechei chon memechon uchei rucho Beit Yisrael Bagalav izman kariv imru amen Yesh mirabah mevarach le'olam U'meil ma'iyah Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramam v'yitnasei V'yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shemei tekudesha Berich u'leila Min kol berchata v'sher tatush b'chata V'nechamata damiram be'alma v'imru amen Tikabal tzolot onodon d'chol Yisrael Kadam avahon divishmaya v'imru amen Yesh lama rabba mitzvaya v'chaim aleinu V'yalkwad Yisrael v'imru amen Osei shalom b'ramav Hu yasei shalom aleinu
V'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. We rise for Aleinu, remain standing, page 231. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol. Let's take it to the celebration. Kakatu b'toratech Adonai yimloch le'olam v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai le'melech kol haaretz b'yom hahu yihye Adonai echad u'shmo echad. Mourner's Kaddish is on page 232. Yikadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah Bi'alma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute b'chayichon v'yomechon u'v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shemei rabbah mevarach le'alam u'lamei amaya yitvarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha b'richu le'ela minkol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata Damiram bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'romav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Yesher koach to those participated, especially to Barry for leading Torah. We're going to take a moment to go and get a bite to eat, nourish ourselves. If you're watching online, you can take a little breather too. We'll come back together in probably a little over 10 minutes and do learning together. I have source sheets, which I also included in the bulletin that went out yesterday. And I'll pass those out once people are seated again, but please enjoy a little bit of food and drink, and then we'll come back together to learn.
On the 6th is my other grandma's side, Giggle. I have really good memories of her, which I want to share with everybody. Yeah,
Just a few weeks.
a few weeks. She died in 2008.
Wow.
At the Jewish Home for the Aged, and I said right by her side, I said, I always remember this. I always brought her chocolate, the favorite was C's candy.
She's got good taste.
Oh yeah, if she was so loud, I would bring her a box of chocolate. She's like, "Where's my chocolate?" It's right here.
Timing was perfect. That's exactly right. Were you doing Rashi study?
Pardon?
Were you doing Rashi study first?
No, that's my wife's group.
Oh, that's your wife's.
Yeah, that's her group.
You
Yeah.
take an action overseas.
From, pardon?
You take an action overseas.
No, I was practicing my piano for the last hour and a half.
Oh, okay.
And I had to end it at 4 o'clock when my wife's group shows up.
Oh, okay.
Yes. But I wanted to hear a selection she
We'll
gave.
see, this is Rav Hashamesh.
Very, yeah. You know, as I walk home on Shabbat and during the week,
chatting with all her
I have a
friends,
neighbor
I see her,
on my
I see
Converse
her
Road who has
people, and I
chickens.
said to her.
Yes, I know
"Hey,
the chicken
Mom,
people, yes.
Okay, and they're from,
I
he's
got
from
some
England.
chocolates," and she was like,
So I said, it's getting quite cold. And I know that the sun will never set over England, but it also never rises.
It's true.
Oh, it was so cold outside.
You're British?
He is.
He is, wow,
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah, whenever I take that pathway, that passageway,
yeah.
yeah. I passed the chicken people.
Chicken people?
Yeah, they're people in the Carthay Circle area who have chickens. They keep chickens.
Oh, wow, okay.
Learn how to play poker.
My elementary school was next to a chicken ranch.
My grandma taught me how to play poker.
Oh, cool.
That's the one that I mentioned, that she always plays, because she cheated in Scrabble, and then she always did, she got it from school.
My best friend growing up passed them.
Okay. Brian, how are the studies going?
Pretty well.
That's where, I think that's what we're talking about. Yeah, the house with the chickens? Yeah, that's what we're saying, is it's about chickens.
The Monday after Thanksgiving,
He said that the guy's British.
and then I think my final, like, the next week after that.
Who's teaching your Talmud class?
There's not a specific Talmud class this year. I think or this semester. I think next semester is the official Talmud class.
Would you Mishnah then, or?
So there's 5 classes I have this semester. One is Hebrew. One is finding meaning in Jewish text, which is taught on rotation. Some days Rabbi Dorf is teaching the class. Some days my parents and so on. So he'll give us a piece of Mishnah or a piece of Torah or the Mechilta of such and such person to look at and like parse and discuss and read, and then we would do that for about sort of an hour or so in Shabruta, and then meet together for a larger discussion.
Very good.
And then there's Rabbi Archie's philosophy class, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, okay. You're enjoying it, I trust.
And then there's a halacha class.
Okay, good. Get some tea. Okay. Very special. Looks good. So at the beginning you said desire, that's her first, I can read that for 5 minutes, I have to take a nap. It's so heavy.
It's so heavy, and I also feel in love with her. I love it. It's like
Yeah.
heavy and intellectual and spiritual. I do, it is thick.
Yeah.
It's very a lot of shine.
Audio program,
Uh-huh.
It is.
meeting,
I wish I held stuff as
or you're more focused on, one of them is far more focused
He's
on
asking me to
Hebrew,
rethink everything I've ever considered about,
general,
the way that we're choosing to have conceived of God.
yeah.
Do you read the Fuchsburg Center material? You see
The
Beck?
sparks that they sent out?
The poem and the
Beck's
finest
or
Hebrew.
Rosenblatt?
I love
You
her
see her
stuff.
thing today?
I did not.
Yesterday?
No, I haven't
She
seen it.
commented on Bikir Ba,
Oh, she did? Okay.
and the word Bikir Ba means, it's sort of ambiguous as in who's what. So Eretz is feminine, right?
Interesting.
Okay.
So, a bit like Bitoka Aretz,
Right,
Shalat?
but also the word appears in Torah's Sidon, and you take the word Bikir Ba, you rearrange the letters, what do you get? Very good.
Well, that's actually a beautiful bridge to the teaching we'll have now, because we're talking about the notion of Sarah's sunsetting and
Yes,
who
yes.
comes next.
Well, you didn't specifically say that in your teaching for today, this afternoon.
I didn't,
But
I'll get
she
there,
was good,
yeah.
very good, thank you. Okay.
I'll come around with some sheets.
Take the name Torah, rearrange the letters, what do you get?
Okay,
Rachel, removing yourself,
Brachot, oh yes,
removing
yes,
yourself, becoming separate.
I guess we'll leave one for.
right, Rokea is a pharmacist. So. Right, that's a very good one though. I never heard that. Okay, good.
When you're ready.
I'm gonna take one,
Thank you. Okay, good. Pass this down to you.
Okay.
I remember once, when we were doing the first triennial of this parsha, Rabbi Klickfeld pointed out the page number starts on Mac is the lifespan of Sarah,
Oh, really?
127.
They've done some clever things like that. If you check out 613, it's got an interesting one. There are lots of clever editorial tricks like that. Very cool.
Kind of come out like that.
Well, we're going to do some learning together on the Parsha to come. A reminder or a teaching for those who may or may not be aware that the Parsha divisions come after the whole canonized 5-book text of the Torah. And chapter divisions are a much later Christian addition. So when we look at the division of where things end and where things begin, especially when we're in the middle of a story, like the story of the life of Sarah, it's interesting to think about the intention of whoever made that editorial decision to break at a particular point. For example, here at the beginning of a new parsha, a new Torah portion, that decision was made by a rabbinic council, so to speak, right? By the elders of a post-closed canon. These are the 5 books, but here's how we're going to divide it. And the division that they chose to make was a division that has us beginning the story of Chaye Sarah, the parasha, with the end of Sarah's life. So we begin the parsha with the death based on the decision of not the Torah as it was handed down from Moshe, but in the literary hands of our teachers and our leaders. So we have to imagine that there's something to teach us in that idea, in that notion. And a lot of ink has been spilled, and a lot of people have begun their drashot on Chaye Sarah by saying, what an interesting thing that a parasha that would be named Chaye Sarah would be about the death of Sarah, because Chaye, of course, means life. It's Chaye, missing its chaser, it's missing its mem, but is basically the internal parts of the first half of Chaim, and is about the life of Sarah.
But when translated properly, I think, or when translated very literally, the verse that begins our parsha, or the verse that we start out from in this story in our parsha, is Vayihiyu, and so were Chaye Sarah, the lifespan of Sarah. So Chaye were like the lived life years of Sarah. So really it's a lifespan more than it is life. Chaye Sarah, two nouns, one describing the other. We're going to get to a story about the significance of Sarah's death and what it must have heralded. But I'd like to give us the context that as a rabbi who works with many different families who come from different traditions when it comes to naming the next generation, I'm aware of the enormous amount of superstition and importance and weight attached to who gets named after whom. And I think that's relevant to what we're about to explore. Because when we think about the end of a life of an elder in a family, we're already thinking about their legacy and who continues after them. In Ashkenazi tradition, the highest honor that can be given to a person in terms of naming is that a child is named after them when? When's the honor given? According to normative Eastern European traditions. So in death, one is honored after their death. One is honored after their death by having someone named after them. In most traditions, central to at least fairly recent tracing back to Spain and Portugal, so we'll call them like centrist Sephardic traditions, the naming rite is that the highest honor one can receive in being named after someone is when someone is named after them in life. In life. I have both in my family. My mom's sister married a man from Egypt. Some of you who've known me for a decade or more have known me to tell this story many times, that my mom and dad are both from entirely Ashkenazi families, but my mom's sister married a man who's the youngest of 6, who escaped Cairo under the reign of Nasir some 50 plus years ago, 60 years ago now. And in their family, that tradition of naming after the living is profound and strong, and there are quite a few people who carry the same names as one another, because being one of 6, there are many, many children in the family, and so many people want to do the honor, the zechut, the merit to that living person, so there are lots of people who carry the same names within the family. And in my family, apart from the Egyptian piece of the family, everyone else sort of names after the deceased. In the conception of the ancient rabbis, naming is like a tiny little fraction of the honor that sort of leaves from one person's legacy into another person's legacy. I want you to imagine the emotional power of naming one person after another, whether alive or deceased, and multiply that many, many, many times over, right? Many-fold power, to imagine what the rabbinic conception, looking back at the story of Sarah, and then who are our next generations? Sarah, Rivka, and then Rachel and Leah are the next generation together. As we go from generation to generation, the notion of the potency and the spirituality and the concentration of who is carrying the mantle of our people as matriarchs alone was so intense and so strong that the rabbis conceived of it way beyond anything that we speak about to this day. Today, if I were to say to you that somebody is the living embodiment or personification of all the power amongst a people or in another time or a place, you might think that I was speaking about I don't know, what living example do we have of that? What living example do we have of someone who just by dint of their birth in the contemporary, let's say, Western world, just by dint of their birth, something new is born in the world and something powerful is happening because of the legacy and the chain of command in that family? Anybody here follow the royal family in England?
I don't follow it.
Some people have a great affinity and a love, or even like what do they call Britophiles, right? People who like really, yeah, people who really with a great accent. I think that gives us then still a fraction of, but a better idea and a conception of what it meant, because we're not talking about the descendants of a monarchy. It's much bigger. Much bigger, because we're not talking about who's sitting as head judge or on a throne. We're talking about who is the matriarch and who's at the head of a people. And it's in that context that I want to study one take on one part of this verse. And before we can go there, we have to look at a verse in Kohelet, in Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is not typically a part of our liturgical canon. Once a year, we bring it into the synagogue during the holiday of Sukkot. We study the notions inherent to Ecclesiastes, to Kohelet, about the fragility and potentially existential crises that could be conceived of and are conceived of in the book of, like, based on the words in the book of Ecclesiastes. But most of the time, we call this, we look to Ecclesiastes and call this formally something called wisdom literature. Why is that important before I even tell you what this verse is? Because wisdom literature is typically not the source of halacha or understanding for the way that Jewish law, customs, and reasons come about. Wisdom literature is meant to be exactly what it sounds like. A book of Proverbs, a book of, pithy is unfair to wisdom literature, but a book that guides an ethos and an ethic of a people, not necessarily a book that's read in depth in order to learn the way that one practices from day to day. So it's actually somewhat rare to see our Talmudic sages, 600 CE thereabouts, right? I say más o menos because by 600, we've got this complete collection of living spoken Talmud, but 600 is when that canon of Talmud comes to a close. And by the time that canon comes to a close, we don't see much of Ecclesiastes referenced as the guide to how Jews are learning to live their life day to day. But it plays a big role in the following Talmud that we're going to read together. So the verse is from the first chapter of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes, the 5th verse. V'zarach hashemesh uva hashemesh ve'el mekomo sho'ef zoreach hu sham. It's poetic, miniature tikpol, miniature parallelism. V'zarach hashemesh uva hashemesh. You can hear that there's a rhythm because there are two similar parallel verbs to each other. And the sun rises and the sun sets. And back to its place it goes. Zoreach Husham, that's where it goes and shines forth or rises. The rabbis take this verse and learn from it something far beyond what the plain read of our text would tell us about the death of Sarah. And we're going to look at that now. The payoff is in paying attention to this long line of stories, and I'm going to take you through it. This commentary, this starts from Bereshit Rabbah. It's a journey to get there. This is Bereshit Rabbah, a very old midrash, and this Bereshit Rabbah is going to feed into the Talmud that we look at. Here's the story. Bereshit Rabbah starts by bringing in a quote from Kohelet, the one that we just read. V'zarach hashemesh uva hashemesh, Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. This old ancient rabbi, Abba Bar Kahana, he came and said, V'chi ein anu yodein shezarach hashemesh uva hashemesh. Don't we know that the sun rises and it sets? In other words, why do we have to be told this? Ella ad shelo yashkia hakadosh baruch hu. Shimsho shel tzadik hu mazriach shimsho shel tzadik chavero. Yom shemet. Rabbi Akiva nolad Rabbeinu. V'kara'u Allah v'zarach hashemesh uva hashemesh. Rather, this saying from the wisdom literature comes to teach us that before the Kadosh Baruch Hu, God, causes the sun of a righteous person, the sun as in the shemesh, of a righteous person to set. Before a righteous person passes away, the Holy One brings into the world the person who will take their place as a tzaddik in this world, a righteous person in this world. And immediately launches into an example, presumably in the voice of Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, who says, the day that Rabbi Akiva, whom we know, who died a martyr, the day that he died, Rabbeinu, Yehuda HaNasi, was born. And they applied this particular teaching to that death and that birth. Well, the sun has set and the sun has risen. Who has the sun set on? On Rabbi Akiva. And now it's risen on Yehuda HaNasi. And who does Yehuda HaNasi become? The editor and conveyor of the Mishnah, right? Incredibly important, not a matriarch of our people, but an extraordinarily important person. And so the Midrash carries forward with a series of stories like this. Rav Ada bar Ahava was born, and they applied this verse in his regard. On the day that Rav Ada bar Ahava died, Rabbi Avun was born, and they applied this verse in his regard. On the day that Rabbi Avun died, his son Rabbi Avun was born. On the day that Rabbi Avun died, Abba Hoshaya of Teria was born. On the day Abba Hoshaya died, Rabbi Hoshaya was born, and they applied this verse before he caused Moses' sun to set. So pausing on that notion, I was just launching because I like the poeticism of the series. Before you get back to Moshe, so lived experience. Rab Abi Bar Kahana says, I know this because I've seen it. I know this because we've told the stories. The day that a tzaddik, a truly righteous person, an important and righteous person among us, passes away, even that same day, the person taking over is born. I'm not going to stop and dwell on the emotional toil and trauma, of course, of the fact that we're hearing these stories of sons who died on the day that their father, who were born on the day that their father died. Right? That is in and of itself, whether it's a parable or a story, that's terribly sad. But that's not the point of our learning at the moment. The point of our learning at the moment is to see that there was such hopefulness in the world because a great person had died, but a tzaddik, a new great and righteous person, came into the world. So that's Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana's proof text, right? And then he says, but even if you go back to the Torah, even if you go all the way back to the Torah, Ad Vayomer Adonai El Moshe. Let's see. Moshe. Ad shelo hishkia shimsho shel Moshe, hizriach shimsho shel Yoshua. Before Moshe died, of course, who do we meet? Joshua. And Joshua is going to take up the mantle. He's the next tzaddik in line, and we get a proof text for that Shenemar. And then Ad shelo shaka shimsho shel Yoshua, zarcha shimsho shel Atniel ben Kenaz, and he becomes the next one. Ad shelo shaka shimsho shel Eli, zarcha shimsho shel Shmuel. Before Eli, and who is Eli? Eli, the priest whom we meet in the beginning of the book of Shmuel. Before his sun sets, we meet Shmuel. Okay? And then we get to Rabbi Yochanan said, actually skip the Rabbi Yochanan teaching because I don't have time to get into the like a calf without blemish, but his beautiful teaching. Before the Holy One, blessed be God. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shimsha shel Sarah. Who's Sarah? Sarah Imenu. Is this text in chronological order? No, it's a mess. It's not in chronological order even a little bit. Because first we're in the contemporary times of Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, who's telling this story, and it's captured in the Midrash. Then he says, wait, hang on, I can go back even further. I can tell you Moshe and Joshua, etc., etc. But of course, Moshe and Joshua, are they before or after Sarah? Way after. Many generations, a whole enslavement, hundreds and hundreds of years, according to our Torah, right? And now he's gone back in time and said, but even before all this, and this is how the text ends, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shimsha shel Sarah, Hizirach Shimsha shel Rivka. Before Sarah's sun set, the Shemesh of Rivka rose. What's meant by this? Now that we've gone through it, what do you understand from this? Before the sun, what does it mean that before Sarah's sun set?
Before Sarah
before she died, Rivka,
There must have been a replacement for her, of course.
there must have been a replacement for her, Marshall says. There must have been a replacement for the, let's call it, for the sunlight, the righteous sunlight in the world, right? This is the image that this text is giving us. Before the sunlight of Sarah could leave from flooding and brightening, let's say, the world. I like the imagery of the Shemesh, though of course it comes directly from Kohelet, so I'm really reading into it. But I like that brightness of life. Before that light would go out, new light needed to come into the world, and that light was Rivka. And who, of course, was Rivka to Sarah? She's the daughter, exactly. She becomes the daughter. No, you got there. You were there. I saw it. It was the daughter-in-law. Exactly. She becomes the daughter-in-law. And why is she so important to our story at the moment when she becomes the daughter-in-law? Because Sarah is not there. And what happens with Avraham in the story that we're reading this week and next? What does Avraham do? He sets about doing something. Yeah, he says, I can't die until my son has a partner. And it's got to be someone who can carry this forward. Rivka wasn't already in the story. We haven't met her in that regard, but she's there to take over and already exist in the world. It's her light that comes to shine and join up with Isaac, right, with Yitzchak, and becomes the new center of the universe in a heliocentric sense, right? In the notion of the sun being at the center of the universe. Sarah is no longer the center of the universe. Instead, Rivka becomes the matriarchal center of the Jewish universe. Everyone with me up until this point? Wonderful. Great. Let's go to Yoma in the Talmud. So Bereshit Rabbah, what we were reading before, were ancient stories, midrashim, told by the rabbis, captured and then begun to be referenced in the early literature that's pre-Mishnah. So by the end of, by the time we get to one of the Common Era, 2,000 years ago, we already have several very old collections of midrashim, Bereshit Rabbah among them, and it gets brought in to many, many places later. By 200 CE when we have the Mishnah, by 600 CE when we have the Talmud. Yoma is going to look back at this teaching and teach us something that goes a little bit extra, a little beyond, a little more parable. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Chia bar Abba wanted to quote Rabbi Yochanan in a teaching that said, Ein tzaddik niftar. A righteous person doesn't die or depart from min ha'olam, from the world, ad shenivra tzaddik kimoto, until another righteous person is made kimoto. What is kimoto? Like him. But of course, it's a little bit of a play on words. Why? Kimoto? It sounds like in our oral tradition. This is my take. This is Rabbi Hilary Chorney's take on it, not Steinsaltz or not the Talmud itself. I think in an oral tradition, it would have been a very clever saying because kemoto is not just like them, but also like their death. So I think it's a play on words a little bit from this parable and this teaching that would have been known from the wisdom literature of Ecclesiastes, of Kohelet, and of course passed on by this Bereshit, this midrash from Bereshit that people perhaps knew, this notion. Perhaps it was even a superstition. I didn't do a deep dive, but in the ancient world, I imagine there was a notion that when a righteous person was about to die, people were looking around to see who is the tzaddik who is taking their place in the sunshine in the world, so to speak. Very possible. So he has this saying, which seems like a contemporized, sort of updated notion based on this teaching from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes, and goes on to say, Shina Emar, and quote our verse, V'zarach hashemesh uvah hashemesh, ad shelo kavta shimsho shel Eli, zarcha shimsho shel Shmuel haramati. He brings the example that one of the many examples brought in Bereshit Rabbah, before Eli the priest passed away, of course, we have Shmuel brought into this world, and he is able to sort of take that place. And then Rabbi Chia bar Abba, remember, Rabbi Chia bar Abba is quoting Rabbi Yochanan, bringing this is his teacher's Rabbi Yochanan. He says, and Rabbi Yochanan would tell a story here. Ra'ah HaKadosh Baruch Hu shetzadikim muatin, amad ushtalan bechol dor vador. Shene'emar ki ladonai metzukei eretz vayashet alehem tevel. So what he says is, he saw the God. Rabbi Chia bar Abba tells in the name of his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan, that what must have happened, what he knows, what he's heard, he doesn't quote any verse, he just says what he's heard, is that God realized that the garden of people, so to speak, was lacking in righteous people. It was looking sparse, right? And as sort of empty. So what did God do? God arose and planted in every generation somebody to take the next place. Beautifully said, because of course we see that there has to be a planting of that seed in order for each of these generations to take over. Because in Breshit Rabbah, the conception is literally these people are being born on the day that the tzaddikim are dying. But the broader notion in rabbinic text that survives in the Talmud is not that on the day that I die, someone righteous will be born, but rather someone righteous already exists in the world, just like with Rivka and Sarah. Well, when the light of a righteous person leaves this world, that there is another righteous person to go forth and take over that light. And what a beautiful idea that God is going about to, when God sees that the supply is a bit low on righteous people in God's garden on this earth, God plants some more righteous people. And then, of course, there's a quote from a text, in this case from Shmuel, which is interesting because that's also where the reference to Eli and Shmuel comes from earlier in this teaching from Yoma, and says that the notion is that God has basically planted in the earth. The plain read of the text, of course, is pillars of the earth, but the idea is that God has sort of planted or put down new trunks and new shoots and new roots of righteous people in the earth. Finally, Rashi. Many, many generations later, the 11th through 13th century, Rashi returns to this teaching, and this is Rashi's direct commentary on the verse in Kohelet itself, V'zarach HaShemesh, Dor Holech V'dor Ba. A generation goes and a generation comes. So now what's the change in imagery? What is different here? Dor Holech V'dor Ba. Yeah. That's interesting. No longer necessarily talking about the righteous, and it's a whole generation who's gone, and then a new generation arises. Marshall, yes. What else is different?
I'm just sort of interested in the language of Dor Holech.
Mm-hmm.
That means one generation sort of leaves, with Dor Ba, another one comes in. And yet, when you look at the language of Kohelet, that seems to be the opposite language, because Dor Ba means setting.
Great. So Marshall's pointing out that there's an inversion here also, because now we've returned to what I would say is both closer to the conception of Jewish time, post-biblically, and also closer to our lived experience in the world. First of all, because how do Jews conceive of the world? Do we conceive of the world that first the sun rises and then it sets? No, we do not. In fact, going back to Bereshit, we don't, right? We actually conceive of it opposite. So this is the perfect place to point out, as Marshall brings up, it's an inversion of the teaching in Ecclesiastes and much closer to the way that we think of the world, right? Vayhi erev, vayhi voker. There was evening and there was morning. Is that what you were going to say, Joey? Baruch shekivanta, right?
And then back before morning, when the person dies, then you do the unveiling.
Different morning, but yes, but a good play on words. So that's one thing that's an inversion. And the other difference is Dor Holech. Dor Holech V'dor Ba is also, I think, our experience in the world. It's not that we experience, a new generation is coming up and then a new generation is gone. The lived experience is a generation goes and then a new generation comes. So Rashi's taken this teaching that comes from 1,500 years prior to him, most likely, and has now expanded it And we'll talk about the tzaddik part in just a second. And also made it make a little bit more sense per the way that Jews think about time. Just a little bit. Okay. And then says, Kasher hashemesh tizrach shacharit v'tishka arvit v'telech kol halayla. Just as the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening, and then it goes all night. Sho'efet lashuv el makom asher zarcha etmol misham shetizrach sham gam hayom. And it wants to go back to the place from which it rose yesterday, because it will also rise from there today. I want to linger on this for a moment. Sho'efet lashuv el makom. What wants to return to its place?
Sun.
The sun.
And then what's the figurative thing that wants to return to its place?
Generation.
Righteousness of generation. We have many different conceptions about how Dor Lador operates in Judaism, but Rashi here is entirely the optimist. Rashi says, when a generation leaves, a new generation is going to come. And the notion of tzedek in this world, righteousness, just like the sun is in orbit and will come back around, and there will be people to lead and people to shine. And there will be an understanding that there is good once again and stability once again, right? The thing that we feel when a great generation goes and we think, my God, where is this world headed? Eventually, those kids grow up. Eventually, those kids also have among them righteous people who perhaps God planted. Eventually, we return to that place where the sun is in fact very strong and shining again. I love the optimism that Rashi ends with here. I think that he takes this ancient teaching, which has such a personal notion of the death of a righteous person being individually replaced, and says, no, it's not just that. That may also be true. But beyond that, when a generation is going, we shouldn't wring our hands and say, well, there's nothing to replace it. Yeridat Hajjal wrote, every generation is further from God than the last. Instead, it's like we are in orbit, and the sun will return to the place because that's what it wants. The world that God has created and set in motion is one in which each generation will, in fact, out of a desire, return to a place of righteousness. I really pray that's the world that we live in. I do. Because no matter whether you sit here today and you feel very old, or you sit here today and you feel very young, the only thing that is true besides the sun for sure rising and setting tomorrow, or setting and rising tomorrow, is that at some point you will be the old generation that is holech, and there will be a new generation, abba, one that is coming in. And to leave this world with the optimism that the generation that is coming will, of course, come back into orbit to that place of righteousness and that place of good and that place of strength is a wonderful way to instill not only a sense of like healed worry within ourselves, but also when it's expressed, can lift up the next generation and say to them that we believe deeply that they're able to carry this on, because of course this is just how the world goes. Their sun will also rise. So thank you for learning with me this afternoon. We're going to move right into the Mariv service to make sure that we can get through it in an appropriate amount of time before the end of Shabbat, which is nigh, right? It's in just a few minutes. Let me move this to the other side. Beer cut, sorry, for the people. Did people have bread?
I did.
You have bread.
I
Okay.
had.
Joey, I'm going to encourage you. Did anyone else have bread? Okay, we have 3 people have bread. Okay, please do share hamalot in the Zimun, and then we'll go into a quiet beer cut on his own, and then I'll lead us in Mariv just following that. Okay, great.
Very nice, so rude.
Yishmar Never Chavisha B'Olam. Baruch Shechan Rishalov Tuvachayinu. Amen. For those who are just finishing up or not doing a Birkat Hamazon, I'll instruct you to open up that Lev Shalem Sidor to page 264 and rise as we prepare to do Mariv. We'll begin with Baruch Hu in just a moment. We'll be on page 264.
What page?
264. Matayim Shishim 264. So when you're ready, please rise. We're on page 264. Baruch Adonai Borach Leolam Vayed. You may be seated. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה ונעץ והודשם הולך וקיים. תלמידים לא יכולים לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני המעריב הרבים אהבת עולם. לאהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולם מברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד ברוך שמו. Adonai Elohechem Hemet V'emunah kol sof v'kayem aleinu kihon. ומלכות ברצון קיבלו להם משה ובנסתר לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ומהרו כולם כמוך בעלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נוראתי לא תוסיף אלה מלכותך רעה ובניך בו קיים לפני משה זה עלינו ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כיפת אדוני יעקב וגילו מן חזק וימינו ברוך אתה אדוני קהל ישראל אשכן אדוני ושמור צאתנו ואוהנו לחיים ושלום יצא ויד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני שומר עמו ישראל לעד. We're on 268.
כי המלכות שלך היא ולעולמי עד תמלוך וכבוד כי אין לנו מלך אלא אתה ברוך אתה אדוני המלך בכבוד זאת תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ועל כל מעשיו יקדש ויקדש שמי רבה ויעמדי וירקדש ומליך וכותי בחיי יכון ויום אחד וחיי תוכל בית ישראל בגלל בזמן קריב אמרו אמן יש שמי רבה ורח לעולם ולמי הומיה יברך וישמע ויברך וישמע ויתנשא ויתדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי קדושה בריחו לעמים כל ברכתה ושירתה שושבחתה ונחמתה דמי רם בהמה וימרו אמן. The whispered private Amidah for the end of the Shabbat begins on page 270. In just a moment, we'll turn to page 279 for Chatzi Kaddish. And after Kaddish, you can be seated. ייכתב ויקדש מרבה, וילמד תברח ירצה וימליך מלכות בחייכון וימליכון וחיית וכל בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יש שמי רבה ורח לעולם וממיה יברך וישתבח, ויבר וישמע ויתנשא ויתדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי קדושה, ובריחו לעולם מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, שושבחתה ונחמתה דמי רם ימה ואמרו אמן. ויהי נועם אדוני לעולם. יקראים בניהו עמו, הנוכי ושרח על עשיהו וכבודהו, ורחמים אסביהו ויראהו בישועתי, ורחמים אסביהו ויראהו בישועתי. Page 216, ואתה קדוש יושבתי, לא תזרע וקרז על זה, ואמר קדוש, 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 אדוני צבא מלך הארץ כבודו. ותזעני רוח ושמע אחרי קורש גדול ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקום הוד תלת. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. יבטחו בך יודעי שמך גילו עזב תתורשך אדוני אדוני חפץ למען זיכו יגדיל תורה ויתיר יכתב ויקדש מרבה ויעמד יברח ירשי וימליך מלכותי וכיחות ומכון וחיית וכל בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב ימרו מהן יש שמי רבה מברך לעולם ומימיה יברך וישבח ויפר וישמע וינשא וישתר וישתלב וישתלל שמי דקודשה בריך ולהילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמר המלמה וימרו אמן ג'יקה פצה דון ודון לכל ישראל קדם אבוהון וישמע וימרו אמן יש למה רבה מן שמי וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל וימרו אמן עושה שלום וימרו אב ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל וימרו אמן עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל לתקד ולת יצחק ואנחנו קוראים ומשחווים ומודים לבכל על כן נקבל לך אדוני אלוהינו ליראת כך כתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Mourner's Kaddish is on 282. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברה קירותי וימליך מלכותי וחייכון ויומכון וחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירם בעלמא ואמרו אמן יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן עושה שלום ברמיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. Please rise for התקווה. כל עוד בלבב פנימה נפש יהודי הומייה ולפתי מזרח קדימה היי לציון סופיה הון לא עבדה תקוותנו היי תקווה בת שנות 2000 להיות עמי חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים Yanai nai 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 yanai nai nai yanai yanai nai 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 yanai nai 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 yanai nai yanai nai 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 yanai nai yanai nai nai oh yanai nai yanai nai 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 Yaina 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 hine el Yeshuati heftach velo hefchain ki ozi v'zimerat ya Adonai vayehi li Yeshua ushaftem mayim bishlason Mi meinei Yeshua, l'Adonai Yeshua, Alecha v'chatecha sela, Adonai tziva'ot, imanu, miskalanu, Elohei Yaakov sela, Adonai tziva'ot, Asher yadzam b'teach Bach Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Yaneinu V'yom Koreinu Yehudim Torah V'simcha v'sason V'ikar Kein Tiyelanu Kosi Yeshua Tesa Uv'shem Adonai Ekra Yainanai 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 Savri Baruch Adonai Eloheinu Macholam Borei Pri Agafen Baruch Adonai Eloheinu Macholam Borei Minei Pesamim Amen Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam morei borei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdi ben kodesh lechol ben or lechoshech ben Yisrael la'ami ben yom hashvihi l'shesh yemei ha'maaseh. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lechol.
Amen.
Atotei Zareinu v'chasdeinu yad b'yad b'kacha v'hakol
כוכבים בלילה, זרינו וחסדינו יד ביד וכחול. כוכבים בלילה.
Peaceful week. Susie, new work week.
Hi, Taiwo.
Yes, hello.
Hello. They started a little late today.
What? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
They started a little late today.
Oh. I think because they were waiting for Minha.
Oh, no, that's, I'm not arguing.
No problem.
I said, I agree.
I got
Ah.
it, David.
Not there.
We didn't
There you go.
yeah.
We were there all morning.
You're very welcome.
They had speakers from Kibbutz Berit speaking today. Very powerful.